Life at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York was a very chaotic one. Ronald Joseph Butch Defeo Jr. heard his parents arguing, and to stop his father from hurting his mother, he grabbed a 12-gauge shotgun from his room, he loaded it, and he went back downstairs. He pointed the gun at his father, and he told him to leave his mother alone and that he was going to kill him. And Butch pulled the trigger, but the gun didn't go off. And Ronnie Sr. just stood there with a grim expression as Butch lowered the gun and just walked out of the room. They were both pretty twisted, and this foreshadowed the violence that was to come. Ronnie Joseph Big Ronnie Defeo Sr. was born on November the 16th in 1930, and his parents were Rocco and Antoinette Defeo. Louise Marie Briganti was born on November the 3rd in 1931 to Michael and Angela Briganti. Ronnie was slim and handsome growing up, and with his good looks, he was able to attract Louise's attention, and soon they were married. Louise's parents didn't approve of Ronnie, so they cut all ties with them until Butch was born in September the 26th, 1951. Because Butch was the firstborn and also a boy, his father demanded more from him, and he was very violent towards him. And he would show him affection, and shortly after, he'd hit him or throw him against a wall. Butch was bullied in school because of his weight, and his father encouraged him to stick up for himself, but only outside of the home. Later, Butch started using amphetamines, and he lost the weight. And as an adult, he was 5'7" and he weighed 155 pounds. On July 29, 1956, Theresa Defeo was born. Allison Louise was born on August 16, 1961, and Marc Gregory on September the 4th, 1962. The family moved to Amityville, New York on June the 28th, 1965. And Louise left Ronnie Sr. sometime after Marc was born for reasons that are unclear, but they did reconcile, and on October the 24th, 1965, their third son, John Matthew, was born. These portraits that you see here took over a year to complete, and they cost $50,000, and Louise Defeo's father paid for them. And once they were complete, the portraits were hung in large golden frames on the staircase wall. When Butch was 14, his father bought him a $14,000 speedboat, and at 18, Butch was given a job at his grandfather's Buick dealership. It was an easy job because he wasn't expected to do much. If he didn't show up for work, he'd still get a cash allowance from his father at the end of the week. He would use the money for his car that his parents also bought for him. And he would use his money for alcohol, LSD, speed, and heroin. And he also started committing petty crimes around this time. Whenever he wanted money, all he had to do was ask. And sometimes he would even take money without asking. And previously, Butch's parents had taken him to see a psychiatrist because his behavior was getting out of control. And he said that he didn't need help, and he was passive-aggressive with the therapist, so the sessions had to end. And he would later point a loaded rifle at a guy that he had known for years while they were out hunting. And Butch just watched with confusion as his friend's face turned white from fear. And his friend ran away, and when he saw him later that day, Butch asked him why he took off so fast. 2 weeks before the crime, Butch was sent to make a deposit for the dealership. He was supposed to deposit $1,800 in cash and $20,000 in checks. But, of course, Butch had to be, quote-unquote, robbed on his way to the bank by someone that he later split the money with. In October and November of 1974, Ronnie Sr. was getting some troubling phone calls, and a coworker said that he was very worried because the calls contained threats, but he never told her what was said. He also said that he didn't know who they were from, so that's still a mystery. Pictures of the crime scene will be pinned in the comments. Butch left work around lunchtime because he was bored. He met with his friends at a bar, and he made sure that they saw and heard him repeatedly call home and not get an answer. He eventually left the bar and went home. At 6:30 on November the 13th, 1974, Butch opened the door to Henry's bar and he yelled, "You've got to help me. I think my mother and father have been shot." And Butch's best friend Bobby was sitting near the bar, and he ran over to Butch. And Butch had fallen to his knees and he was crying hysterically. He composed himself, and he asked for others at the bar to follow him and Bobby back to his house. So 6 men got into Butch's car, and Bobby got behind the wheel. The house was only a block away, but Bobby was driving like a madman down the street, and one of the men told him to slow down, but he ignored them, and he got to the house in a matter of seconds. One of the first things they saw as they drove up were 2 quarter-moon windows that looked like eyes, which was common in Dutch colonial homes. On the front lawn, there was a lamppost with a sign attached that read "High Hopes." And as Bobby walked up the front porch steps, one of the men told him to be careful because the person might still be in the house. And Bobby said he didn't care, and he unlocked the door. And the house was quiet except for Shaggy's barking. Shaggy was the family sheepdog, and he was tied to the inside of the kitchen's back door. Once they made their way to the second floor, the smell of decomposition hit them. And Bobby turned on the light in the master bedroom, and he saw Butch's parents in the bed. There was a hole in the center of Ronnie Sr.'s back, and Louise was under an orange blanket, so her injuries weren't immediately obvious, and she had been shot twice. Ronnie Sr. was able to stand up, but a second bullet stopped him right away, and he was found face down in the bed. One of the bullets went through the bed and ended up on the floor, and that's how they knew the caliber that was used. Behind the bed was a wall of mirrors, and those mirrors reflected the horrifying scene. And Butch's best friend Bobby was about to pass out, so the other men took him downstairs. A friend stayed on the second floor and found John Defeo laying on his stomach. In the other bed was his brother Marc. Next to Marc's bed was a pair of crutches and a wheelchair because he had recently suffered a bad football injury that almost paralyzed him. And he played for the Massapequa Mustangs. Dawn was also found face down in her bedroom on the 3rd floor, and she had been shot in the head, and it's always been a mystery as to why the family were all in the same position. Marc wasn't even able to sleep on his stomach because of his injuries. He was forced to sleep on his back. So how did he get on his stomach? And by this time, one of the men from the bar called 911. Detective Gaspar Randazzo was the first to question Butch at the scene, and when asked who he thought was responsible, he named a mafia hitman named Louis Fellini. It was suggested that Ronnie be put into protective custody if that was true, and he was then taken to the station to be interviewed. He said that Fellini had lived with them briefly, and he knew where his father had stored some cash and some other valuable items. And after interviewing Butch for a while, they let him go to sleep while they went back to the scene. And at the scene, they found boxes of ammunition in Butch's room that matched the murder weapon, and divers later recovered a rifle that matched the murder weapon. And divers later recovered a rifle from a creek behind the Defeo's home. The next morning, detectives went to wake Butch up, and he was still asleep on a cot in the police file room. And they started to inform him of his rights, and he started to get very nervous. He said, "You don't have to do that. Get Fellini. He's the guy you want, not me." But unbeknownst to Butch, Fellini had an alibi, proving that he wasn't even in the state when the crime happened. But Butch still kept lying, and he said that Fellini woke him up at gunpoint and made him watch as Fellini took out his family. He also blamed his sister Dawn and his mother for the deaths. And a detective asked him if it really happened that way, and Butch finally said no. "It all started so fast. Once I started, I just couldn't stop. It went so fast." And a friend and neighbor of Allison Defeo later said that she and her brother heard dogs howling for about 20 minutes and that it woke them up around 3:30. Later, Butch told police that the crime occurred around 3:30 a.m. and that afterwards he took a shower, he got rid of his blood-stained clothes, he got rid of the Marlin rifle and the cartridges on his way to work. More than 800 people attended the funeral services, while 300 people waited outside. More than 20 children that went to school with the younger siblings were also in attendance. Reverend James McNamara said, "Since last Wednesday night when I brought the Defeo family the sacraments of God's peace and love, my heart has been too heavy to try to seek an explanation of this tragedy. The Defeo family has found their way back to their father." Pallbearers placed the 6 coffins into hearses, and 9 police motorcycles escorted them 5 miles to St. Charles Cemetery. And red carnations were placed at the foot of the coffins by everyone in attendance. The medical examiner's office found beef stew in the refrigerator, so they tested it to see if the family had been drugged. They weren't. Butch's trial began in October of 1975, 11 months after the crime. And at first, he testified that months before the crime, he heard voices. So his defense was innocent by reason of insanity. But one of the things that put Butch behind bars was him saying that he couldn't hear the gunshots, but he could hear the dog howling. You can't hear one without hearing the other. And at least 2 guns were used during the crime. The prosecutor and medical examiner were both shocked that only 1 man was on trial. Butch eventually said that what he did was cold-blooded murder, period. No ghosts, no demons, just 3 people, in which I was one. And the post-mortem examination found that Dawn had unburned powder burns on her nightgown, which was consistent with Butch's claims of her involvement. However, this wasn't pursued after Butch confessed. And all 6 of the victims were found lying face down in their beds with no signs of a struggle or sedatives having been administered, leading to speculation that someone in the house should have been awakened by those noises. The police investigation also concluded that the rifle had not been fitted with a suppressor. On November the 21st, 1975, a jury found Butch guilty of 6 counts of second-degree murder, and on November the 4th, he was sentenced to 25 years to life. He died this year.